Okay, Marissa, you've got an amazing background, right? 14 years, if I'm not mistaken, in national recruiting, 15 years into corporate marketing management, and 12 years in HR. How how did you get started in the coaching side? Tell me a little bit about your backstory that got you to where you are today.
Well, actually, my first experience as an executive coach was actually at a financial services company back in the 90s. Years
Hmm.
ago, I worked as a corporate senior HR leader, and I had internal clients. And oddly enough, one of my internal clients was the CEO and chairman of the board, which, as you
Hmm.
I'm sure might imagine, might be a little bit dicey, having to
Hmm.
give the guy who actually cuts your check feedback, 360 feedback, and also critique him on presentations that he's given and just give him advice. But he and I actually developed a pretty strong relationship. And in fact, in addition to him, I had EVPs of marketing and EVPs of the financial services area, et cetera. So I had a lot of very critical people who trusted me with their background, because part of my background was to give feedback. I also had to create corporate resumes at one point, which are pretty lengthy resumes that pretty much from cradle to grave demonstrate what your background is. But
Yeah.
that's how I started my executive coaching career. But then I transitioned, as you said, into marketing, because these very same executives had access to me, and at one point they were considering what to do with a division of the company that wasn't doing very well, and they decided that I was a person who might be able to help out in that area. They were determining whether they should pull the plug or not, or give it a little bit more energy to see if it could be turned around. And it ended up being a marketing job of all things, which I had no experience doing formally. And from that point, it was about 4 months later, I developed a strategy that ended up creating a scenario that ended up in one of the best years I've ever had, a record-breaking year. And so I stayed in marketing, not only at that company, but I was recruited to another company in San Diego, which is where I am now, as a vice president. So I continued my career in marketing in many different industries, in satellite communications and medical devices, et cetera, and got laid off one time too many, quite frankly.
Mhm.
Companies that can't
Yeah.
afford, operations in the California area. And I just decided, this is for the birds, getting laid off constantly, because I was in a marketing capacity, and many times marketing is one of the first things to get cut. So I decided to fall back on some of the background that I had in HR and do some recruiting. And also I had many coaching clients, uh, because of a situation where a boss of mine, previous boss of mine at one of the companies I had worked for, had unfortunately lost his job, called me for some advice. He was in another county. I was coaching him by phone. And bottom line is he lost himself, and he despaired, and he did the unthinkable. And that is
Mhm.
really what caused me to go into career coaching more on a serious basis. That was the mitigating driver that actually caused me to take on new clients, because he was one of the last people I thought that would ever happen to. And I knew that at that time, back in 2008, that many people were despairing. So that's how my career was born, or reborn, I should say, in coaching.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. It's always interesting to hear what brought you into it and what really brought your heart into the work, right? And seeing people really suffer and struggle and seeing if you can be a piece to that puzzle to fix it, and help people. And I know you've got a great background, right? And I don't just want to, toot your horn and say that you're just, amazing the whole time, but I do think you've got a great background. You've got a great experience in all these areas. And so we're really excited. I hope the listeners really learn from you today, from what you can offer and some golden nuggets here. And tell me, tell me a little bit about, because your career spans multiple disciplines, how does this unusual blend of HR, marketing, recruiting, how does that help your clients, being able to have so many different areas of expertise?
I would never have guessed this, but there is a sort of unifying factor here, and that is, um, in marketing, as an example, you're connecting people with services and products, right? So when you're a matchmaker, essentially you're making a match. And as it
Hmm.
turns out, HR is pretty much the same thing as well as recruiting. You're matching people to the right opportunities. And, so as a recruiter as well as a coach. So there's that unifying common denominator there. And so it was pretty natural for me, since I'm good at matchmaking, to do this type of work. But the marketing, having been, and I've been a published writer, I've written articles, I've written certainly a fair amount of press releases and many other things over the years, ad copy, etc. That helps me to, I'll just say, honestly, legitimately wordsmith or spin someone's background in an honest way, that really helps them to put their best foot forward. So that's how
Hmm.
the marketing, I think, primarily helps, as well as the fact that I know a lot of people in the marketing world, so I can help people specifically with marketing jobs, among others. But I've been in other different industries like financial services, banking, satellite communications. I even worked for NBC for about 6 years, television entertainment. So, so I've got a lot of different industries where I've sort of collected people along the way and have created very
Yeah.
close relationships. So I'm able to make referrals. So that's another way that my background helps. And of course, when I was an internal uh, coach for executives and others, I was able to help people move from one area to another. I did a lot of career development, a lot of leadership training. So it was really natural that I would fall into this as a coach, even though it was by default because of, as I said, a former boss losing his job and then losing himself. So all of that
Hmm.
combined helps me to be a very adept coach, as well as the recruiting, of course. I can help, sort of when someone is explaining their skills, I'm hearing the skills and I'm mapping those skills to other areas, because some people are looking for a career change. And I certainly do career makeovers. So I can hear those skills and relate them to different jobs and suggest different jobs that they might be successful in.
Mm. Do you find that you tell people about jobs that they would be successful in and they never even thought about it before?
Yes, yes,
Hmm.
that happens all the time. Or different, let's just say different areas or different sub industries. So for example, someone has done project management at a particular company and has worked on different types of uh, projects, and so that require different unique solutions. And so they have very good consulting skills because they're consulting with
Hmm.
different areas of the company that they're trying to dive into, understand, and then figure out what puzzle pieces need to be put in place in order to solve those problems. But that
Hmm.
also works in a consulting firm. So working for any of the big four or any other companies that do consulting, that could be a good match for that type of a person as well, with their given their skill sets.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
many people would say, oh,
that's
gee, I've never thought of that. I've always thought of just working for one corporation where you're doing it internally. No, you could also do it for many other companies by vis-a-vis one of these consulting companies.
yeah. Yeah, oh, that is interesting. It's fun to see how some people are you can be blind to your own brand, blind to your own story when you're focusing in such one direction, right? And then you hear somebody say, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" I think that's a great skill that you have to be able to show people that. So, um, what insights from your recruiting background do you incorporate into your coaching practices that set you apart from others, right? Because not all coaches are recruiters. So how does that help?
Right. Well, again, just going back to just understanding sort of the world of different jobs around. And I'm unlike many other recruiters in that many recruiters are masters. They call them market masters, meaning that
Hmm.
they're either recruiting for a particular type of job, like a marketing, they're a marketing market master, right? Or
Hmm.
they're geographically only involved in jobs in a particular area of the country. I do all jobs, all levels throughout the United
Hmm.
States and all industries. That's very unusual. And I didn't start out that way, quite honestly. I started out doing medical device because that's the last company that I was laid off from, right? That had huge, huge layoffs, and there weren't a whole lot of jobs at that time, given all the people who were laid off from our company and other companies at that time. So
Yeah.
ultimately, I ended up doing more than just that, because I started putting myself on the market, and recruiters started calling me about other types of jobs. And I said, well, I can help you. I'm not interested in that type of job, but I can help you. So I ended up doing other types of jobs for other recruiters. I became my primary client at that time became recruiters, oddly enough. So other recruiters
Mm,
call me. In fact, they call me the Hail Mary recruiter, which the first time I heard that, I thought that was one of the funniest things I'd ever heard. But
yeah.
different recruiters will tell other recruiters, call Marissa. She's got a broad network. You know, she's got lots of different databases, and she can help you with different types of jobs. She doesn't limit herself to one market or one industry. So
Mm,
I ended up getting a lot of different clients vis-a-vis that. So the bottom line is I can help people in a variety of different jobs, different parts of the country, to find work and map their skills to those jobs.
mhm. Yeah. And I think it's an important point to touch on. It's not just California that you're at right now, right? It's across the whole nation that you have those connections. And you brought up kind of career makeovers, that mindset for your clients to have. So let's talk about what advice would you give those looking to reinvent themselves to make a significant career change? It's a broad question, but what first comes to mind?
Well, the first thing is, for something as important as your career, I strongly think that you should have a coach. I mean, many sports, folks in sports or even coaches have coaches. And I think it's important to get different perspectives. But my personal feeling is that, in effect, using a coach should pay for itself, either initially or ultimately. It should get you
Mhm,
to the goal line faster. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand what it means to work with a coach, and I have found that out the hard way. Sometimes when I speak to people, they think that a coach is going to run the bases for them, do a lot of the work. In fact, even just this morning, I heard from a coach who applies for jobs for people, which I think is personally a very bad idea. A person has to be
mm,
invested in their own career and has to have passion for it, and to sort of defer that to another person doesn't seem to make sense to me. So,
mhm,
I sort of have a unique, approach to coaching, in that I feel that it's very unique for each person. Unlike a lot of coaches, what I do is I take I listen to what they're saying. I sort of evaluate where they are, what their needs are. I'll discuss their needs with them. A lot of times people don't understand. They think they need something from a coach, but they really need something else. So for
mhm,
instance, some folks aren't at a place emotionally where they're ready to work with a coach. They're either angry about getting laid off or depressed about getting laid off, which was the case with my former boss and many others.
mm,
So you've got to get them from a place of emotion to a place of logic, decision making, and good decision making at that, and action. And that involves two different sides of your brain. I was a psychology major, so I'll just tell
mhm,
you, your frontal cerebral cortex, right, the one that's responsible for your emotions, you've got to shut that off and switch it to the other side of your brain that's responsible for other frontal cerebral cortex, which is responsible for decision making, logical thinking, etc. And even to make that shift, sometimes I have to do that with some of my clients. I have to get them away from one leg in the past and being um, angry or depressed about their current situation, or frightened, scared that they're never going to get another job. I've got to get them from that place to a place of logic, clear thinking, and then we can move forward.
mhm. Which I'm sure that's not easy with with it's really somebody's livelihood, right? I mean, it's their way to support their families, it's their
Right.
way to, do something that fulfills them. And there's a lot that goes into that. I love that you made that comparison to having, because a career coach, I mean, obviously it's you can make connection to a basketball coach or a professional sports coach, right? Or a trainer. And I think about, when I was growing up, my parents, I had a personal basketball trainer, right? I had somebody that would show me things that I had no idea was going on. And that was for getting a high school basketball team position, right? So I made the team. Imagine how important it is when you're an executive, making over $300,000 a year, supporting a family, paying bills, doing all these things, navigating the market. Having a coach is a great idea, right? So,
I appreciate that. And it's interesting that you even bring that up because I did have someone who, a coach, a client rather, forgive me, that
mhm,
was at 300. He was at 350 and he called me up because he wanted to be at, he wanted to be at least 550. So I already had my
mhm,
marching orders for what my job was, right? So I had to prepare
yeah,
him for that next step in his career. And what's interesting is I helped him just on LinkedIn, changing his settings because not all settings are optimized on LinkedIn. So I know the behind the scenes, what needs to happen on
mhm,
LinkedIn, as well as what needs to happen from a content standpoint to present yourself. So I, at that point, was recording videos and I didn't have a whole lot of time. He said, well, give me, an hour or 45 minutes. So I spent about 45 minutes with him. And he had at that time a very unique job. He was working for one of the big four, and and which was in and of itself a great thing. So how do we get him from a company that is prestigious as one of those companies to another company that could use his services that might be as big, you know, as a big
mhm,
four, in terms of what he needed to surround himself with. And within 3 days, and this is odd and it doesn't happen this quickly, this often, I wish it did, but he had
mhm.
five different individuals contact him on LinkedIn. And within a week or two, he had he was basically going in for interviews for two of those five. And the short story is that he ended up getting offered two jobs, one for one for 550,
Mhm,
coincidentally enough, and the other one for 800 grand, which I did not expect. Uh,
mhm.
it turns out
Wow.
that, yeah, it turns out that, and here's where I say sometimes, you look at it and a coach really should pay for itself. I didn't expect it to pay for itself in so many fold for him.
Yeah.
But it turns out that he didn't even get the $800,000 job, which is the one that eventually he decided to accept because a new CEO took over. So it was one of those roller coasters, which sometimes happens when you're job searching. But about a
Mhm,
month later, he called me and he had an offer for 1.25 million for a company. So we took him from what he was making at that big four, to another actually big four company where he was making much more and doing much more for the company and for the country, I should say, as well. So
mhm. Wow, that is a cool story because it's showing kind of the benefit of having a coach with, hey, I want to get to 550, and then having you and having that, rebranding, having the advice, the career advice. I'm sure there's interview help, salary negotiation, lots of different things, and we'll dive into a little bit more of that. But I just kind of want to touch on that point. I think that's very interesting of how that exponentially helped him, just salary wise, right? Just one of the things that helped him with, and then I'm sure it was more fulfilling and doing a lot more as well. I
yeah,
want to I want to touch on LinkedIn just for a second, a little side note, because I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. You played a significant role in helping LinkedIn launch the Pro Finder platform in 2016, right? You assisted over 77 job seekers in 1 year, a record achievement. Could you share more about that experience a little bit and how that impacted your maybe, where you're at now?
yeah. Well, I'm a recruiter first. Even though I've
Hmm.
been a career coach inside of companies and outside and partly by default. But yeah, when I did the ProFinder program, I really didn't expect a whole lot from it, to be honest with you. I signed up for it. They accepted me. They asked me to participate in the launch, which was November of 2016. And it was unbelievable because the minute I said yes, I got deluged with leads. This is a great program which now has been rebranded as the Services Marketplace. For those who don't know, and anyone can sign up for it. and hopefully be approved for whatever skill they have, whether it's bookkeeping, accounting, career coaching, any kind of resume help. It can be a subset of career coaching. They have radio buttons where you can be very specific about what type of help you can assist with. But I did not expect 130 to 150 leads every single day. And I just simply could not keep up with the number of leads, especially as I'm trying to be a recruiter, responding to all of these requests for a coach. And because they listed me as a full service coach, meaning LinkedIn and resumes and general career coaching, executive coaching, presentations, because I'm also a speaker. I'm a frequently requested speaker, less so after COVID, I have to tell you, but still have done that as well, help people with public speaking. So I was getting a ton of different varieties of coaching requests. And it actually came to a point where I didn't realize, but LinkedIn wrote to me and actually called me and said, you have helped close to 80 people in 1 year. We'd like to write an article about you, featuring how well this program is going over, and especially how successful you've been, which was very flattering. And they went ahead and they did that. And at that time, they were giving top coach awards in each category. And so for 2 years running, they were doing that. And I received a 10%. I was one of the 10% top coaches for 2 years running. So I helped a lot of people. Of the 77, 68 actually got jobs either within a month to 3 months, depending. But then there were some people, to my point earlier, who were not really ready for a coach, either emotionally, or they just had a misnomer about, misconception about what a coach really does for you. So there were a few people, among those, I think there were about 3 or 4. There were some who had one or even both. In one case, parents died, so they weren't ready from that standpoint. But there were maybe 1 or 2 that just didn't understand how to work with a coach, and that sometimes happens. And I did my best to work with them, but overall, it was very successful for me. And it helped, of course, get the word out that I can be an effective coach, and of course, get referrals as a result of that.
Amazing. It's so interesting to hear that and see that. And I want to dive into some of the clients. So it's another little tangent here, but kind of relating back to that salary negotiation. So it can be really challenging for professionals knowing what they're worth as the market changes, as salaries change and ebb and flow. So tell me a little bit about, what strategies do you recommend when approaching those discussions that they have with employers?
Well, one of the first things is planning. You really have to
Hmm.
plan a conversation like that. I think you should plan all conversations, but that in particular,
Hmm.
it can be very tricky. And I employ, there are 2 different general models that I use. One is called the sandwich approach, which means you start with something positive. When you're having these discussions, you start with something very positive, whether it's talking to your boss about how much you like the job, how much you appreciate the coaching or the support, advocacy, whatever that they've given you, or opportunities to grow your skills. You start with something positive and you end with something
Hmm.
positive. And in the middle, therein lies the challenge, is when you have to have this discussion. So a
Yeah.
sandwich approach is something I use for a lot of different things, including salary negotiations or any kind of difficult discussions, because like a band-aid, you want to rip, you want to go through the middle part as quickly as possible, but as succinctly and as sure-footed as you possibly can. I also employ a 10-step process, okay? Because
Okay.
it can be very tricky. And technically
Hmm.
it's really 11 steps if you include being careful about the environment, if at all possible, to try and have this conversation in a neutral place, a neutral private place. So whether it's a conference room, or if there's any way that you can go out, to a lunch or what have you, and have a meeting off site, that can be good as well, so that no one party has, I'll call it an unfair advantage. Okay. However,
Hmm.
from a boss's standpoint, their comfort level may be to be in their office. So that can also work. But the 10-step process, first and foremost, do your research. You've got to back up your, request for more money, a bonus, whatever it is that you're asking for. The second, I would say you got to prepare. Absolutely prepare. You've got to outline some kind of an action plan and be sure to consider two outcomes. And those two outcomes are, what do you want them to know? And then what do you want them to do as a result of now
Hmm.
what they know, what you've shared with them? And then you want to script and you want to rehearse your approach. You want to actually uh, practice out loud. It's very important because you don't want to hear what you think you need to say for the first time when you're in the meeting with them. And a lot of times you
Hmm.
get tripped up just on words. That can happen as well. So I suggest rehearsing out loud. And I also suggest, if at all possible, finding someone you trust that you think will give you honest and constructive feedback and suggestions. So that's important as well. Um, as far as sort of a fourth thing, I would say the timing is very important. I think a lot of people are so into their own heads and what they want to say that they're not considering that maybe that particular time there's something going on from a work standpoint that is occupying your boss's mind, and you're not going to have their full attention. They're going to be distracted. And to the extent that you might know, there may be something going on in their personal life. So choose the timing very carefully. So that's one thing. If you know what's going on in their life, especially, they'll be more receptive. Be mindful of your tone, okay? Because you may feel very strongly about, wanting or deserving this next raise, and if you come across as combative in any way, that's not going to land very well. So choose your language, body language, especially. They say 80% of communication is really body language. So what is your body saying? Lean in, for sure, lean in. If you're going to cross your legs, cross your leg in. There's a lot of studies on body language and nonverbal cues, but your tone, as far as your vocal tone, should be professional. It should be conversational to the extent possible. It should be interactive. Make sure you're not just spewing out what you need to say. Make sure you take a breath and let your boss react if in fact, there's an opportunity or that you see that they want to react. Uh, be prepared to listen. Be prepared to listen to what they say and accept any kind of feedback that they might be giving you, and rationale. But you should have a rationale too, obviously, for why you're looking for a higher salary or a bonus or what have you. Um, then
Hmm.
ask your boss to share if you haven't heard anything, especially, but even if you have, ask for the feedback. Ask your boss to share what thoughts that they might have, uh, and to react to what you've requested so that you can start to gauge where they are and test the temperature, and then see if you've made a compelling case so that they can support your request. Then discuss next steps and timeframes. Don't leave that meeting without knowing that, and be open to any suggestions that they might have, because they might say, I hear what you're saying, but I think in order to, for instance, get that promotion that you're asking for, if it's a promotion, you need additional training. So I'm going to suggest that you take this course or get this
Hmm.
certification, or what have you.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's a 10-step
No.
process.
Yeah, I love it because what I was gonna ask was, common mistakes and pitfalls with that. But I love that honestly, you hit those pitfalls, common mistakes um, as you went through what you should do, saying, hey, don't do this or focus on this because if you don't, it could have some issues. But are there other common mistakes you see when there's not an employee, but somebody about to get that job, they're in the interview process? Do you ever help with that negotiation as well? Of what salary they want to get based off of what the employer is offering. Do you ever see that issue?
If you're saying there's a disconnect between, I don't know if that's what you're asking, between what the individual is asking for and then what the company is willing to pay, or what
Hmm.
that particular hiring manager is willing to pay. Yeah, unfortunately, it
Hmm.
happens a lot. In fact, sometimes I'm thrown a complete curve, because uh, first of all, there's a difference. I should sort of frame it this way. There's a difference between what the range is versus what they want to pay. Okay, I once worked for a
Hmm.
company that would not pay any more. They were budgeted for up to the midpoint, not the whole range. Okay,
Hmm.
so that you've got to be clear about that, because the range is one thing, but what they're budgeted for is another. So that's the first thing. But I've been throwing a
Mhm.
curve, and certainly some of the candidates that I've had, and even coaching clients have called me saying, wow, when we first talked about it, they were okay with, I told them what my salary expectations or desires were, and they seemed okay with it. And all of a sudden I get a job offer and it's below what we discussed. What do I do?
Mhm.
So that happens. Sometimes they forget, and sometimes maybe they conveniently forget, or there's some kind of disconnect between HR and hiring manager. Sometimes there's too many people in the process, and things get a
Mhm.
little bit convoluted. And I once got a call. I was actually on vacation with my dad at a shopping center, and they had 15 minutes. They had to basically respond to an offer, and the offer was lowball. And I happened to know that
Mm.
company, and I knew how to kind of navigate around it. So that was serendipitous. But I gave them the sandwich approach. Okay.
Mhm.
I told them to start positive and to end positive and what to say in the middle. They rehearsed it back to me in the store. And I also, um, let me just finish that story. The person ended up getting 15 grand more as a result of it. They
Oh,
went back,
amazing.
they got 15 grand. And what's really funny is I didn't know right away. Excuse me. And I sent them an invoice for just my time on the phone. And I got a check for the wrong amount. So I called the person up and I say, Julie, you know, you sent me too much money. And she said, no, I didn't. so so I thought that was pretty cool. But the other thing
Yeah.
I always tell people is be prepared for anything during
Mhm.
a salary negotiation. And I suggest strongly that people consider three different scenarios. So scenario one is that you ask for between this and this, and they will give you your minimum. Some companies will just do that. They'll give you your minimum salary requirement. How are you going to feel? Think about the worst time period that you're going to experience in that job, where you're working on something very difficult and now you're getting out of bed. How are you feeling when you get out of bed? Are you feeling, I undersold myself. I didn't negotiate a high enough salary for this type of a scenario. If that's the case, you should have an antidote for that when you get that call offering you a salary. Second scenario is they give you something in the middle, a little bit higher than your, minimum required salary. How are you going to feel then on a bad day or during a process that is particularly difficult? Do you have a spring in your step? Are you feeling resentful? And if you are, you should have a scenario for that as well. And the third is you get out of bed with a spring in your step, you're doing cartwheels because they gave you such a high salary and comp package that you can't believe that they did that they really value you. And, basically you're taking this leap of faith that everything that you've represented is true. So obviously that's the best scenario, and you probably don't need to renegotiate for that. But the first two scenarios, you should have an antidote, whether that's, do you offer a sign-on bonus? This is, and again, you should start with the sandwich approach. You always listen to the offer. You thank them for the offer and the vote of confidence. You start out positive. Thank you so much for that offer and the vote of confidence. I really appreciate that you're considering me, that you would be willing to entrust me with this job.
Mhm.
Now comes the hard part. However, uh, can I ask a few questions at this point? Then they give you permission to ask those questions. When we first discussed this, we discussed a salary between this and this actually falls a little bit short of what we originally discussed. Is there any way that we can narrow the gap? And then let them respond. Let them respond.
Mhm.
Sometimes they'll ask you very specific questions. They'll ask you, well, what were you hoping for? Well, we originally discussed this or that. You can go into that. But sometimes it's better not to disclose anything specific and give it to them, give them some general ideas, whether it's a car allowance or a sign-on bonus or something else that might in some way, if they can't make it up in salary, if there's some reason, maybe an internal equity issue, someone else with the same amount of service who's been there, same amount of skills rather, that's been there for a long time, it would be unfair to that person to offer you more. If that's the
Hmm.
case, they can maybe handle it in a different way by giving you more time off, etc. So those are the types of things that you should be thinking about, whether it's that you're just being paid the minimum and you're really disappointed that it's just the minimum and you want to negotiate for more. And by the way, or if it's the second scenario, 66% of people do try and negotiate something, even if it's something small. And always leave the conversation positive. So the tail end of that sandwich, right? The other side of the sandwich is it's really great because maybe the person on the phone does not have the authority to make that decision on the spot and said, well, if we did this, would you accept the job? Absolutely. But they may not be able to say that. They may have to check with someone else. So make sure that there's a game plan so that when you close the loop with the other side of that sandwich, that you can actually say, I'm really excited about the prospect of working. I so enjoyed meeting the team and I can't wait to hit the ground running, once I get on board. Something positive. Why is that? Because psychologically, what that person who is offering the job is going to remember is that there were two things that were positive and one thing that maybe wasn't quite so positive. Okay. And they'll carry that to the next person. They're super excited. They actually were a little bit disappointed about, the package, but if we do this, they'll come on board. So they're left with a positive feeling about you as a candidate and that you will accept the job.
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love hearing the stories too, of kind of, the success stories of how it works, people getting more. It's interesting because I find myself, when I'm interacting with people face to face, and a lot of people I know are people pleasers, right? So it's hard to know when you're in those situations of, okay, I don't want to be the one that just agrees, because I don't want to wake up in the morning like what you said and be stuck saying I undersold myself, right? You want to make sure that you do step out there and you know your worth, and you use the sandwich method, but you make sure that you're being paid properly, and you negotiate with them, right? And see what you can do in a lot of different areas.
Right. And there was one gal, she, to my point about maybe don't be so specific, she was at a company for 17 years. So you can imagine how much vacation she got. And here it is, she's starting
Mm-hmm.
over and they're offering her, her 2 weeks of vacation. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't happy with that. And she said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, just tell them how important that is to you. Okay. And that
Mm-hmm.
especially happens for people who, let's just say, have roots outside of the country. Sometimes traveling back home, uh, requires a lot of days off. So a lot of people who were, internationally, originally came to us from another country, they have that issue.
Mm-hmm.
But this gal did not tell them, well, I'd like 6 weeks because that's what I get. She didn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it came back, she ended up getting like 2 months, something more than she had even from her previous job. So by not specifying the parameter, she ended up getting more.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. This is related, but a slight tangent. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm curious to thinking about mindsets, and the mindsets of your clients that you're working with, and on the coaching side of things. And do you find yourself, I mean, there's been a lot of layoffs happening. There's just a lot of things always going on in the world. I mean, in 2008, right? We mentioned 2008, there's a ton of things going on, right? There's a lot of things that's been going on for a while now. And I'm curious, do you find yourself working with your clients on mindset and making sure that they're confident in their capabilities and that they're seeking the right, I know you help them seek the right positions, but what do you have any thoughts on that with mindset and making sure that they're in the right headspace?
Yeah, yes, that's definitely true. That was especially true in 2008. A lot of people were
Hmm.
despairing, and
Hmm.
sadly, a lot of people were suicidal. And seven found their way to me. I've accounted for six, meaning that they're placed and have been placed, but there is still one who is not placed. So I'm hypersensitive to that. His situation, just quickly, is he found out his 9-year-old son was terminal and had to leave his job.
Oh.
Yeah. So he left his job, and 2 years later he lost his son, and then he lost himself. So um, that's a specific and difficult situation, but there are many people that are impacted not just by job loss but by other loss. And some people recover faster than others, and others may not recover well at all, long term. So yeah, when I'm working with someone, I definitely take that temperature, especially since I was a psychology major. So
Mhm.
and I'm very sensitive, especially given the situation with my former boss and those other seven folks. So I definitely work with them and make sure that they're mentally ready. And again, that's that shift from the one side of the brain to the other side of the brain. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, that's all true. You know, if you think about it, you can't emote and think clearly or as clearly at the same time. You can't emote. So that part of your brain that controls emotion, the right side of your brain, needs to be turned off. Okay. And the other
Mhm.
side of your brain needs to be activated in order for you to conduct an effective job campaign. So I do my best to get people into the logic side of the brain, the left side of the brain. And that typically is accomplished by starting to ask a lot of questions. When you ask a lot of
Mhm.
questions, it forces people to answer and to think, and they get away from emoting. So that's what I
Mhm.
have to do first. It doesn't happen as often, although I'll just say in the last few years, especially after COVID or during COVID, there were a lot of people that was starting to simulate the same types of people as I had back in 2008, which were a lot of people who were just despairing and depressed and sometimes to the point of suicidal.
Mhm. Well, it's sad to hear that that does happen. I mean, it happens all the time, and it's not a fun situation to be in. But I think it's great that you are able to help people with that and get that personal, interaction with people and help them see their value and their, give them some goals and things that they can achieve. And I know that you're not just a personal life coach, but I think that is a kind of a added benefit. It sounds like that comes from working with you as well and having that mindset. I want to I want to talk about how awesome I think your website is. Let's dive into that a little bit because um, you have some kind of do-it-yourself website resources. You got a lot of different things there underneath the resources tab. You also have connections to, kind of this database of recruiters. Kind of fill us in on, what people can expect, some of the benefits of going to your website and seeing not just reaching out with you personally, but also even just touching base with the website and seeing what offers are in there.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was created because I have a soft place in my heart for job seekers. Okay.
Mhm.
So it's mostly created for job seekers as opposed to potential clients on the recruiting side. Although that's great
Mhm.
as well. So there are three things you can do on my website. As you pointed out, there are recruiters on my website. So I'm part of a recruiters network of 1,300 recruiters. We all post our jobs on a common feed. Those of us with websites can feature that feed on our website. So there are currently about 2,000 jobs on my website represented by those 1,300 across industries and across the United States. So they're purely US jobs. Some of them are remote, some of them are part-time, hybrid, on-site. There are a variety of different types of jobs. And at no given point do I know, because I don't keep track of 1,300 independent recruiters, what's on there. So it really is a do-it-yourself. You go on there, you put some keywords in. Hopefully you see something that is suitable for you and you can apply directly in 10 seconds. It's not like a lot of
Mhm.
websites that 45 minutes later, you're still struggling to get things because it's parsed incorrectly, in the ATS system. When you upload your resume, it parses and, oh gosh, why are those areas blank? Now I have to copy and paste. It's none of that. 10 seconds goes directly to the lead recruiter. Very easy. Not all recruiters are created equally. I'll just say that.
Mhm.
My particular style is I always get back to people, regardless of the outcome. I tell them whether they're being considered moving forward or not. Not all recruiters do that. Some of them, it's very transactional. So that's not the right person for the job. They just say disqualified and that's it. So I'm left holding the bag and usually have to go in the system and see if they were disqualified and try and find out why. And sometimes in a couple of cases, the recruiter was too green to realize, or the presentation was not clear enough, but I was able to see it in the resume that they should have been considered. So in some cases, I've turned that
Mhm.
around. Usually I don't get too much in another recruiter's business, but if I see something
Yeah.
that to me seems obvious and it's going to benefit both, why not, right? So that's the first thing you
Hmm.
can do. If you don't see anything, just try back in a week. I suggest just checking weekly. The second thing is, as you pointed out, the resources tab. I put a lot of my free tips, tools, downloads. I even have a couple of pre-recorded on-demand coaching sessions from Zoom that people can just click on. And
Hmm.
especially if my coaching fees are out of reach for someone, they can get some free help. And a lot of people have called me
Hmm.
and say, I got a job just using your XYZ tool. There's one tool in particular that has an 86% success rate when it's used properly, according to What Colors My Parachute, which is a book that used to be published every year until 2019. And very few things in this world in terms of job seeking are 86%. Applying for a job online, for example, is 2.9%. It's under 3%. So, but if you apply for a job, but try and get an internal advocate or champion, it increases your chances exponentially. So it's usually better to try
Hmm.
and do that before you even apply to the job, or certainly after the job. The benefit of applying before the job, just as an aside, is that that person might get a referral fee. So they'll be more interested in running your resume to HR because they might,
Yeah.
it's a win-win situation. That would be one of my suggestions. But having said that, that's, you have under my resources tab, there are 4 sub tabs, you know, groups that you can join, career sessions that you can join, networking sessions on Zoom, off Zoom. Some of them are in person. You can do that. And the third thing is just uploading your resume to my ATS system. And the benefit of that is you've got 1,300 sets of eyes that will see that. Right now, there are over 8 million resumes represented by those 1,300 people on my website. So when they're doing searches throughout the week for unpublished jobs, because sometimes we're not allowed to publish, and other times we just didn't get a chance to publish that job, you can have a second chance at getting a job if a recruiter is checking that database through keywords, finds you, clicks a button, and within an hour or two, I release your resume. So those are the 3 things you
Hmm.
can do on my website.
That's amazing. I'm going to include that link to the website in this podcast below so the listeners can see it. And Marissa, thank you for all your time. Thank you for sharing all your insights. There's so many golden nuggets in this, and I hope the listeners can learn a little bit from you and reach out as well if they want to learn more from you. So thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity. I really do.